I need it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Becca Wellington, all the way from Seattle. So we're 6,000 miles away, or about 18 inches away from on the screen. That's spooky, isn't
Yes.
it? Yes. So, fellow adoptee Becca, we were talking about what we're going to talk about, and most adoptee podcasts are about stories, whereas Thriving Adoptees trying to make it about insights or epiphanies. And Becca said, I've got a very clear idea about epiphanies. So tell us more.
Okay, I will just get right into it. So, can I start with sort of some backstory that leads up to the epiphany?
You can, by all means, yeah.
Yeah. So I was adopted at 2 days old in the state of California, United States, in 1975, which is kind of like right at the precipice of domestic adoptions in the United States. And at a time when adoptions were super closed, sealed, like the policy was to seal records and falsify birth certificates and then just move the baby from one, community to another and pretend like it never happened and just move on. And so that's what happened to me. And I grew up knowing I was adopted, but also, living in this paradigm that this was the best thing that happened. I heard again and again, you should be grateful. And I was grateful. I was given a lot of opportunities. My parents were loving people and had a lot of resources, which opened a lot of doors for me. But I just went through my life until I was about 41. Let's see, 2017. So about 41, believing that it really wasn't a big deal. Being adopted is not a big deal. I won the lottery. Everything's great. Don't overthink it. These are not the droids you're looking for, right?
Right.
That's what I was going to. And I really have come to sort of see that whole time there were a lot of joys, a lot of struggles in my family where nobody was connected biologically. I think of that time as sort of like living in the Matrix. I guess people call it red pilling a bit. And then my epiphany happened in 2017. So I was about 41 years old. My older sister was also adopted and who was adopted pretty much at birth, also in the state of California, and who struggled with addiction throughout her life. She gave a child up for adoption. She lost custody of a child that she was raising. So she had enormous trauma in her life. And in 2017, she died of a drug overdose. And that was it. I just keep thinking of that scene in The Matrix. I love The Matrix. Where Keanu Reeves' character literally gets the cord pulled out of his head, right? And he falls out of the Matrix, right, into the real world. And that was me.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't happen that immediately. It was through the next, I would say, year of doing really intensive grief counseling as a result of my sister's really brutal death, really, really hard, traumatic death, that the cord kind of slowly got pulled out. But even a year compared to having lived in it for 40 years, it felt incredibly jarring.
Yeah.
And I'm still coming out of it, right? I'm still recovering from that. So that was my epiphany moment, was her death.
Was her death.
And the fall.
And coming out of the fog, but in a bit more brutal way than most of us do.
Yes. And I'm just, I have, as a result of that, I shared with you in a previous conversation, part of my therapy, not the epiphany, but the recovery space after that epiphany, involved doing a lot of writing that my grief counselor encouraged me to do. And that evolved into a book that I have coming out in the spring of 2024 called Who is a Worthy Mother? An Intimate History of Adoption. And so the recovery was writing and trying to understand the fog, I guess. And on a kind of macro level, how did I grow up in this fog? Where did this fog come from? We've all been living in it, and then in the process of kind of recovering, I've been communicating more with adoption communities and learning like that there's this thing called the fog. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So first off, when you shared the story of your sister last time we spoke back in May, it floored me, and I'm just about listening to the story 6 years after it. So what the hell it did to you at the time, I can't even imagine to believe. So my heart goes out to you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's hard. It's really hard to lose somebody in that way. I think there can be good death. I've had people die in my life who are older, and it's peaceful and it's beautiful, right? And it can be a time to celebrate and remember. This was brutal, and there was no celebration afterwards. It was the way I describe it in my book is my sister and I were both born in silence, right? Because adoption, particularly historically, was all about silencing, right? Just closing it off, silencing it happened, shaming, and then she died in silence as well. There was so much shame and hurt around her death that it was just shut down by my family. So it was hard. It was not a good way for somebody's life to end. But because it was so painful, it really was a catalyst for a very strong epiphany. I think it took that level of jarring to kind of wake me up out of the fog, to realize, no, being adopted is significant and impactful, and there's always trauma around it. And to deny that and to think you can just transfer a baby from one person to another and close it and silence it and shut it down, that's not going to have residual impact. It's insane. Now looking back, I'm like, this is insane. But I really was like swimming in that fog for a very long time, believing those narratives that this was a good thing. It was done in the best interest for everybody. Just be quiet and move on.
So I've heard the coming out of the fog as the subconscious becoming conscious.
Mm.
How
Yes.
does that stack for you?
That totally stacks. One of the things that I've really kind of been doing a lot of work, I've done a lot of work on myself since coming out of the fog, kind of like you were just making this distinction between the epiphany and then the sort of the healing that comes after the epiphany. And one of the strategies or things that I have leaned into since coming out of the fog the subconscious rising to the conscious is really looking at Gabor Mate's work, you know, how trauma impacts the body. And I have lived with Crohn's most of my adult life, which is a genetic disease. So it's kind of interesting, right? I inherited that from my, you know, my biological ancestors, whoever they are. And I lived with a lot of pain and a lot of physical pain and discomfort for a lot of my life. And now I'm realizing I'm doing better now physically, because I think the subconscious, everything that had been suppressed, is coming out, right? There's an awareness, and that allows for healing, like in my head, but also literally physically.
I mean, I think of that word a lot as well, that suppress word. Do you think there is a suppressor?
A suppressor, like an energy or an
No,
element.
like there's I might be being a bit too complicated here. So if I am, just tell me to ask a different question. I'm quite happy. I'm at my edge here, right? So suppression has happened,
Mm-hmm.
or has it happened? You know, who knows? The conscious the subconscious has become conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a suppressor? You know, is there, you know, like a ghost in the machine
Mm-hmm.
saying, no, Becca can't handle this. No, Simon can't handle this.
Yeah.
Let's keep it damped down. Let's keep it suppressed. Like,
I see it more from a sort of policy perspective. I think, and this is kind of something I get to in my book, is I believe that it's really rooted around the commodification of fertility and sort of levels of power in and I focus on American society, right? So I think this is happening in many different societies. I've read quite a bit about adoption, assimilation, and adoption in Australia. But so in the United States, there's just been this history of taking babies from women who are deemed unworthy for different reasons, largely connected to race, class, access, and, you know, privilege, and moving them to women who are deemed as worthy mothers. And so I think, you know, on a deep level, there is a system of commodifying babies, so that those who, again, around trauma of fertility, who cannot have their own children, can get access to children to create an image that society tells particularly women they need to create this family, right? And at the root of that, again, is this transaction of a baby from one to another. And so I think there's, in order to make it palatable for companies and organizations, adoption organizations, to actually commodify the adoption of babies and earn money in doing that, there has to be a level of suppression in society, or a silencing around the trauma of adoption, to make it palatable for people to buy into it, right? To say, yeah, oh, this is great, right? It's
yeah,
okay to do this. There's nothing wrong with doing this. This is great for the baby. Everybody wins. The suppression has to exist for that to happen.
so can I take can I take you back to the micro picture?
Yes.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking how that I'm thinking about what you and I did, and what other adoptees did, and or the suppression that happened within us.
Yes.
So the subconscious has become conscious in with a shattering impact. So what do you think comes after the fog? There's an appreciation of the trauma,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what else? What comes next? What has come next for you in your healing journey?
So I kind of lean into the journey that I went on. Well, because it kind of happened simultaneously. The death of my sister, dovetailed with this coming out of the fog, right? So it's almost like I was grieving two deaths. And
Shit.
so does that make sense? The
It does.
death of identity belief that everything's great, this is perfect, there's no problem, to, what I experienced really was traumatic and really problematic. And then the worst part is the silencing around it, that nobody talks about it. I think that sort of compounds the trauma, right? And that's part of the suppression. But so what has helped me is realizing that, you know, the way anybody goes through grief, it's like a cycle. It's a cycle. Like you have to feel it and go through it. There's no way to avoid it, right? You kind of have to ride the wave of
This is
it.
the Kubler-Ross curve, right?
Yeah. And you can't, you just have to, you have hard days and then you have great days. And it takes a lot of time.
And that Kubler-Ross curve, it's, yeah, Kubler-Ross. I'll put a link to a description in the show notes, listeners, right? So she Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with this curve, and it looks a bit like a horseshoe, right, with a big trough. Okay. And
this is around grief healing, sort of recovering from grief. Is that's
it's a grief curve, yeah. It's a grief curve. And she doesn't say anything about how long it takes, how long to skip the stages. So it's kind of useful to a certain point, but then, yeah, but it's not a timetable, right? It's not like a bus timetable that's going to say,
no,
56.
It's different for everybody. And you can think you're doing great, and then something
Drops
triggers you. Yeah, and you feel terrible, and it's like you take 10 steps back and then you move ahead, and then you take it's a maddening experience, and you have to really feel what you're feeling and honor what you're feeling, and ride that wave, or that horseshoe roller coaster.
There's I had an adoptive mum on the show called Beth Syverson, who runs Unraveling Adoption podcast, and she talked about an adoptive mother coming out of the fog, which I thought was a very interesting one.
Yeah.
Because
we're all in the fog. That's the thing. That's part of the suppression. Everybody's in it to participate in it,
Yeah. So what? So it's fog. It's awareness of the trauma. It's understanding this Kubler-Ross curve. It's 1 step forward, 10 steps back. 1 step forward, 3 steps back. Internal snakes and ladders. And what else? What else does it look like? What else has been your experience of this?
Well, what's been really important for me is to tell stories. Like, I think it's just phenomenal that there are people out there like yourself and others who have podcasts where people can share their experiences. Like, that in itself is just sort of like macro level coming out of the fog. Does that make sense? Just in the storytelling, that is profoundly important, that voices are heard. And kind of something that's really important to me is the truth telling around it, because the fog and the suppression, right, is totally dependent upon silencing. So how do you solve for that, or how do you respond to that? Is you share story, you talk about it, you bring it to the surface, and you talk about your experiences, and you amplify voices so that there's no longer silencing around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's like the heart. That's where I'm at right now. That's like what is most healing to me.
So writing your own story down and
Yes.
sharing it with others and listening to other people's stories.
And listening to other people's stories, and realizing that so many people in the United States, around the world, right, are adopted and are have experienced this, or have adopted a child, or have a partner who's adopted. Like, we are all connected to these stories. So like, you're not alone in the experience, right? That is huge.
That's huge. Have you had any? So we've had a huge, yeah. Have you had any huge healing moments yet?
I think I've had lots of little healing moments. I feel like in some ways I'm so new to coming out of the fog that I need a little more time to reflect back. I guess,
Tell us about the little ones then.
well, I think one of the biggest ones, at least right now, that's sort of on a really conscious level that I'm thinking a lot about, is that that my book, which is it's a historical memoir, right, talking about my adoption journey, and the memoir part really is a lot about coming out of the fog on a very personal level, but I dovetail that with sort of the history and the policy that explains the fog. It just blew me away that a publisher, an academic press, would want to publish this story. I mean, and that's how much I'm sort of in the fog still. I still, in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is not an important story. It's not legitimate. It's not real. Like, my suffering isn't real, or that the adoption is traumatic. There's still that old sort of mantra: these are not the droids you're looking for. This is not a problem. And so it just blew my mind that the press, the University of Oklahoma Press, which is an amazing academic press, would say, yeah, this is an important story to tell. That really was so much validation. That was like really pulling the veil off my eyes, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm seeing two parts of the fog. The way that you see the fog, the way that you're expressing the fog to me, I've only seen one type of fog, right? So I've seen psychological fog, right? So subconscious becomes conscious.
Yeah.
That's something that's going on within me, right?
Yeah.
I've only seen a micro level fog.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is a cultural fog.
Yes. Yes.
Now I'm expressing those as two separate things, But it would
Yes,
seem to me that what you're saying that they're intertwined.
absolutely. What do you think influences our micro level personal experience with the way we see the world? So much of it is what we're told, right? And what we hear. You know, I think there is a really deep connection between the two, because that sort of that macro level, the societal paradigms totally inform what we think about ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we think other people see us, what we think is good and what we think is bad, and what we think is right and wrong. And all the stories that we tell ourselves that either keep us in the fog or pull us out, it comes from external sources, right? It comes from the world around us. And so I'll go back to, I think, as more stories are told, like the stories on your podcast, right? And in books, and in, I mean, there's some amazing books that are coming out about adoption too. And as those stories go out into the world, it will transform individual adoptees' experiences with coming out of the fog. Does that make sense? I
Yeah,
really believe.
yeah, it does. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, this is you know, like a belief shift for Simon. Yeah, I'm seeing two things, and you're seeing one thing. Yeah, yeah, Becca's right. I get this. And I was also thinking, I'm trying to think of a parallel. I was thinking of it like another kind of trauma thing, another trauma source, another source of trauma, and how that was. And yeah, so I spoke to a friend of a friend of a friend, or and I've known this guy a long time actually, but he's like he's the son of a friend, but he's now like 40 and he's got kids and he's getting divorced, and he heard that we have a property that we rent out, right? So he was getting in touch to see whether you know, whether we could accommodate him, how much it was going to cost, and I know he's going through a divorce, and I asked him how the kids were. And he was like, "My kids are fine." And I just thought that was a very quick answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How much, you know, I don't know his kids. I don't know the story, but he was very quick, and the like the tone of how he said it was very dismissive. And I just thought, is that the truth? Is this guy throwing it off? Like it's not. I don't know the truth, but he didn't seem to take a break. You know, like I, yeah, I know a bit. I know a bit about this lad, and I know a little bit about why the divorce probably happened. And I'm thinking, well, you know, like. But anyway, I was trying to come up with a similar thing. Um, can you think of a similar?
Sort of how the coming out of the fog happens on a societal level versus like a personal level.
Yeah. So, all right, I've got one. Like smoking. I've got one. Smoking. Right. So, for doctors used to advertise smoking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good for you.
Yeah. You'll never be alone with a strand, apparently.
Yeah.
Right. It's good for you, and it's going to help you win friends and influence people because you're never going to be alone. You
That's quite a
sad,
fog.
you sad, miserable git. You need one of our cigarettes to get some friends. You know, this was the messaging going on in the 60s, right here.
Yeah.
So But there was a time, you know, when people the shift in coming out of the fog about lung cancer took a while,
Right. And also
and still
just sort of
people still smoke, right? People still
the
smoke.
culture of smoking, how that manifests in a personal level, like in a house. Like when I was a kid, I had friends who we'd get in the car and there's a parent in the car smoking, and there's, you know, 3 8-year-olds in the back. That was great. There was no problem with that. That would not fly today, right? So that's a great parallel, right? So you have this societal story. This is good. This is okay. This is good parenting versus this is now harmful to your child in your sort of private world. You don't do this, you know. We've had a huge, yeah, huge shift in
So
how we
that
see it.
we can see it, and you know, it took them.
I want to say one other thing, because the smoking one, that's such a great, I mean, the story around the whistleblowing with the top tobacco companies in the States, it's just a phenomenal story. And the kind of the narrative behind all of that shift was how much, I think, gaslighting was happening. Gaslighting, which is kind of a big word now, but I think that gaslighting is a huge piece of that, of maintaining the fog, right? Is literally saying what you're experiencing or what you're thinking is not true. I feel sick when I'm in the car and 4 people are smoking. That's not a problem. What's wrong with you? Smoking is good for you. And now it's like, whoa, okay, this is why I feel terrible when I'm in the car and 4 people are smoking.
So back to the adoption stuff. Uh, where's the hope?
Well, so I just realized something when you were talking about your friend. You asked me the biggest parts of healing, right? Have I had big moments of healing? And I feel really embarrassed that I did not share this. But the biggest thing that put me on this journey of healing, and it happened right before my sister died, actually. So it was kind of like leading up to the big unplugging, was I had 2 of my own children, biological children, and having those 2 children and meeting somebody that I'm biologically related to for the first time in my life just was profound. And in listening to stories, podcasts, and, you know, reading stories, I know that a lot of people have had a similar, adoptees have had a similar transformative experience when they have their own biological children. It really shifts how they thought about the world and sort of their experiences. And for me, that was a massive shift.
And how did that affect your beliefs around adoption?
So the biggest thing, the first night I came home after my first daughter was born, I had like a crazy out of body experience. And I had just had a very long labor and a very, very traumatic emergency C-section where her heart rate was plummeting. And, you know, I was briskly wheeled into the emergency room, and like they cut me open. It's crazy. I mean, they cut me open and I could still feel like they had to do it so fast. And this was after 38 hours of labor. So my body was just trashed, literally. That was the most physical trauma I've ever experienced, like real physical trauma. And 2 nights later we came home and I'm holding my baby, and I had this like unbelievable awareness, and it wasn't even like cognitive, it was more like physical awareness that, and maybe this sounds crazy, Simon, but I knew unconditionally as a fact that when I was born and my birth mother gave me up, she gave birth to me and then handed me off, it was phenomenally traumatic for her. It was probably one of the hardest things that's ever happened to her. I don't know her. I've never talked to her, but I was just like, how could it not? And I had been told my whole life that she didn't want me. She like kicked me at the curb and drove away and continued on with her life and everything was wonderful. And I'm like, there's no way. So it was like that fog, like just gone. I can't believe that anymore because it's just not true.
And how did that impact your view of yourself?
Wow, that's a really good question that I've never, my view of myself.
Yeah.
I think it was for the first time I really understood that that I experienced a lot of trauma and was part of a pretty traumatic event at birth that is still impacting me. And I got to do some work and figure this out. And then especially as I was this brand new mom and I'm like, and then it was like, oh my God, I'm a mom and my birth mom couldn't mother me for whatever reasons. Like, can I do this? She couldn't do it. Can I do it? It was like this huge wake-up call. Like, I've got to figure this out or else this will tear me down, you know? And I wanted to really be a really present mother. And I knew I had to really look at this stuff and do some healing so that I could really enjoy being a mother. Because there was so much trauma around it for me, I realized. So, yeah, that was, I can't believe I didn't think of that originally. But yeah.
Yeah. Are you seeing any gap between you and your trauma?
I think probably there are times where I have big feelings and I kind of have to take a break and, I lean into work or I, distract myself. And then there are times where I look at things, I think it's kind of like the horseshoe. I forget the name, the
Kubler-Ross.
The Kubler-Ross. Sometimes you have to dive into it and sometimes you have to take a break. And sometimes you have to get close to it and sometimes you have to take a break. So I think it depends on where I'm at, and what's happening in my world, what I'm able in that moment to kind of look at and take on and feel, because sometimes it's scary to have those big feelings.
Yeah, and that's why they were suppressed.
Yes. Because and that's why, also in this journey, as I've been reading a lot about adoption, and I actually just had a wonderful phone conversation with Laura Engel, who you connected me with. She's lovely, amazing, a birth mother, amazing story. I mean, listening to her story, that brought up a lot of feelings for me, Simon. It was hard and good to listen to her story. From her side as a birth mother. But my point in sharing about her was oh my gosh, I just had a total like it's gone. Yeah, I'll just say it's an emotional journey, riding that wave of grief.
What do you think the opposite of suppressing is?
I think feeling it, right? Feeling your feelings and having, but doing it in a way that your feelings are legitimized. You're not crazy for feeling what you're feeling. It's okay to feel what you feel.
Yeah, well, that's the point of the stories, isn't it? Yeah. So one of the most profound before and after stories I've heard, as in coming out of the fog on the healing journey, one of the most profound things I've heard from have you come across Pamela Karanova on your?
Yes, yeah. I've connected with her. I listened to her interview with you.
Yeah.
I maybe she's done a couple. I heard one of her interviews on your podcast. She's amazing. Yeah.
We've just done one interview together. So the one that you've heard too, and it comes from that. So did anything land for you? Because I'm gonna point towards what she said that I think is the most significant thing for our conversation today.
Okay.
But before I do that, I want to ask you whether you spotted it first, because like it's clear as mud to me. It's not as clear as mud. It's clear as daylight to me. But like you're not. You're not.
No, because I'm trying to remember her. I mean, I just remember her. I mean, she really like redefined her life. Like she recreated her life. I just remember that she moved. But you got to tell me. I'm.
So.
You tell me what
she did the opposite of suppressing.
Yeah.
So she'd been numbing with booze.
Yes, I remember that.
She'd been numbing with booze. So it was conscious, intentional suppression.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wasn't doing the suppression on purpose. You weren't doing the suppression on purpose. There was no suppressor, right?
Yeah.
She was doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
Her feelings were so bad, she was consciously numbing them, and she knew she was numbing them.
Yeah.
But then she stopped numbing them.
Yeah.
She stopped numbing them because she had an insight, and the insight was, I can lean in to these feelings. Or maybe it was a post-rationalization. I may be out something. But the big thing was she lent in to her feelings.
Yeah.
And the transformation happened. Healing transformation happened after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we live in a world, trauma is scary.
Yes.
So we try and push it away.
Yeah.
But if we bring it in, if we lean it in, we bring into it.
Yeah.
We bring it in close.
Yeah.
And so I have felt that trauma is going to envelop me and drown me.
Yeah.
But then I've gone out on the surfboard.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do this really because I'm not very good with my balance. That's why this metaphor runs out. But I thought I was going to drown in the trauma.
Yeah.
And then I didn't.
Yeah. Because are you saying you didn't drown actually because you let it in? You let yourself
do it intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was my
I saw
experience.
something. I saw something. I didn't do an affirmation, didn't write it in my mirror. You are not going to drown of your trauma, Simon.
Yeah.
Actually, what happened for me was a profound decoupling from my trauma.
And what was the catalyst for that? What opened the door for that to happen?
Loads of them. There's been loads of them. Most of them don't make any sense to anybody, apart from when I tell the story about reading the letter from my birth mother about the teddy bear. And I was kind of asking you a similar question earlier on, but you went a different route, right? So what happened for me, the teddy bear is this consolation prize.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't love me enough to, she didn't effing love me enough to effing keep me, but she gave me this effing teddy bear as an effing
Right.
consolation prize. Okay.
Right.
That's when I'm 40. Loads of other healings along that way, between the ages of 40 and 48, and loads more healing since, and I'm 56. I'm still healing moments now, but 48, when I'm 48, I read the letter from her to the social worker about the teddy bear, and the tears cascade down my face and they wash away. I had 20 seconds of anger towards my birth mother, and 20 seconds of fear in a therapy room, probably another 4 years later. But that's it. It wasn't chronic. It was really confined to 20-second moments of the most intense fear and anger I've ever felt,
Wow.
washed away by reading the letter about the teddy bear, when it becomes clear to me that the teddy bear is a symbol of her love,
Yeah.
not a consolation. When I
Yeah.
realized that I was totally wrong in those 20 seconds of anger towards her,
Yeah.
and totally wrong in the belief that she
Yeah.
didn't effing love me enough to effing keep me.
Yeah.
Totally and utterly effing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think there's a very strong parallel between that story and me sitting on the floor in my home with a 2-day-old baby in my arms and having this profound realization. Because part of that realization was she did love me. You can't birth a baby with, carry a baby. She did love me, and she didn't give me away because she hated me, and she didn't, she just wanted to live her life. So a similar epiphany that was just profoundly powerful and hard to feel, and just there's no coming back from that. It's a huge shift. And I didn't when I was pregnant and preparing to give birth, I had no idea that that was going to happen. I didn't walk into it thinking I'm going to have this experience. I had no idea. So it came out of left field, hit me on the head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do remember what I was going to say about Laura, with the great conversation I had with Laura Engel, who's a birth mother, wrote a beautiful book about her experiencing reconnecting with her son, her biological son, who then passed away. She echoed some of the research that I've been learning more about around addiction with adoptees. And she spoke about that as her son, who was adopted, died of, I believe, an overdose, and was an addict, very similar to my sister. And I think, talking about suppression and oh my goodness, I just spaced on her name, the amazing woman
Laura.
who is Laura. Yeah. Well, not Laura, no,
Pamela Carney.
yeah. That's a very common theme for adoptees, is to intentionally suppress with medication, drugs, or lots of things, stress, work, other things too. There's lots of ways humans have learned to self-medicate, so that we don't have to feel what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think coming out of the fog is finding ways to feel those things in a way where you're supported and you can feel them and not be shattered by them, and move on.
Yeah. Can I share some? So I did another podcast recording yesterday, and I released it already. Released it this morning. But we came up with the adoptee that and I were chatting about what comes after the fog, and we extended the metaphor, like what actually happens. And I came up with it on the spur of the moment, or we came up with the spur on the moment, based on the sharing of experience and learnings and stuff like that. And I just thought, do you want me to run it? See what you think of it? Because I haven't asked
Sure,
anyone. Yeah. So we come out of the fog,
yeah.
and we become aware of the storm clouds of trauma that were hidden by the fog. Right. So the fog's underneath. We're standing on the earth. The fog's hugging us and above us, but between us and these storm clouds. The fog lifts. The storm clouds are there. We can see the trauma. Yeah, we can see the trauma. And there's a tiny there's a tiny blue window in the black clouds of trauma. Right? We're drawn to that light. We're drawn to that little bit of blue. For some reason, it catches our eyes, and we're drawn to it. And we have a leap of faith, a leap of consciousness, and we head towards that blue window, and then we travel through the trauma. We travel through the trauma clouds, and we merge in with the blue sky above, and we look down, and we can see that we're the sky, and our trauma is below us and behind us.
I think that's a great metaphor. I think one part of it that I really like is that you go towards the trauma. You have to go into, right, to get to the window. Yeah. You have to go in to those storm clouds, right, to get through them.
Yeah.
I
like the way you extended that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, and I don't know, I again feel like I'm really new on this journey. I don't even think I'm remotely like through the window yet. I don't know, maybe I'm heading towards the window still, but I don't know if we ever just leave those storm clouds in the past. I think we might be on the other side of them, but they're
okay.
One thing I'm thinking is they're always part of us, right? That's always going to be part of our story. And
are we our
I'm
story?
learning, huh?
Are we our story?
Are we our story? Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. But I have to say, from my perspective, I will always be an adoptee. Like, I can't change that. What I can do is sort of change how I see it, or change my perspective on it and my relationship to it. But I will always be an adoptee, and I did experience trauma around that. So it's not like I want to get rid of it. I guess there's a part of me that's sort of holding on to it, in that it's kind of helping me step into redefining myself in a really good way. And it's an important part of who I am. For the first time in my life, I'm saying I'm an adoptee, and And I'm okay identifying as an adoptee, right? It's not something I'm ashamed of. Seriously, Simon, most of my life, I didn't tell people because I bought part of the fog was I really was ashamed. And I worked so hard to just fit into my adopted family, to look like them, to act like them. So nobody would ask. And I was able to pass because I looked enough like them, as same race. And
So, can I go back to my metaphor to finish the story then? Based on, well, not finish it, but add another layer to the story on. Because you're right. So we've gone towards, and we've done what Pamela did, right? We've gone straight into it, and we've gone straight into it, and we've come through this little blue window, and we've merged with the sky, and we're looking down, and we can see that we are not our trauma. That's quite a big thing, right? This is, we are not our trauma. And then eventually those clouds pass, right? And then another weather front moves in from the west, okay?
Right.
And it's not as scary.
No, exactly.
It looks exactly the same, but it feels differently. It feels different. We're not as scared by it.
Yeah,
And then it goes, and then another, and then it goes blue sky again, and then another trauma cloud comes in, and it's worse.
Yeah.
Somehow it's worse.
Yeah.
But then
but I think the act of going through that journey is what allows us to experience those next layer of clouds in a different way, because they're no longer on top of us. We're sort of on top of them.
Yeah. And it's a metaphor, right? But the big thing is, are we identifying with the sky or the cloud?
I think this is so everybody has to sort of thread this needle or go through this investigation in their own way, right? All of our stories are so different. I think for me, I can't be the sky without the clouds. Does that make sense? They are a part of my identity. That my journey isn't a part of my identity.
Do the clouds damage the sky?
No, I don't think so.
I'd agree with you then.
Yeah, I think the gift I'm seeing is that if I hadn't had those storm clouds, I would never have gone up through, I wouldn't be on my path of walking through that window. And that walking through that window is really profound and one of the greatest gifts of my life, right? So it's an important part of it.
Because that's when, I don't know if this is on the Kubler-Ross curve or somebody else's. There's a guy called Robert Dilts who has a level of consciousness pyramid, a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But at the top of it is meaning. So what you're doing there is you're seeing the meaning. You're seeing you're seeing the manure that's helped you grow rather than complaining about SH1T.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, that fits. Yeah.
Cool. Brilliant conversation. Anything else you'd like to share?
Just I hope people get a chance to read my book when it comes out.
Yeah.
Spring 2024. Who is a Worthy Mother? An Intimate History of Adoption.
So we'll put some links to your socials today or whenever I publish the podcast, and then let us know when the book's out, and I'll add another link into it. It's take me about 30 seconds. So it's no problem.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you again for creating platform for voices. It's so important.
You're welcome, Becca. I love it. Lots of love, listeners. Love to you, Becca. See you soon. Bye bye.